Alexander Sanitation Authority, now known as AlexRenew. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as it appeared?
So moved.
Second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ms. Huff, do we have any members of the public? Okay, let's move right into the consent agenda. 2 items in it we have to look at together. Minutes from our February meeting, as well as a expenditure for professional engineering services to support the preliminary and primary systems upgrade. Mr. Carl, do you want to say a word about the upgrade, or is it self-explanatory? Feel self-explanatory?
Sure. As presented last evening at Finance and Audit, one of our major initiatives next fiscal year, and has been an initiative for the past few years in a planning process, but we're going into design and construction, is the preliminary primary improvements at the front end of the plant. That's the raw sewage pumps, coarse screens, fine screens. That's building A and K. And we already did the preliminary settling tanks. The engineer for that project, we are proposing to award it to GHD, who was also the same engineer that did the preliminary plan. We went out for competitive procurement, and they were successful after an RFP process.
Question: what is the amount of the contract? The 811,000, or is it a different amount?
That's just for this fiscal year. The remaining fiscal year from here until.
So the contract you'll be executing with GHD is roughly how much?
So if we looked at the cost of the construction, it's around 80 million, probably looking in the $6 to $7 million range for support throughout the entire program. But we're doing this in a task order. I'm sorry, in a phased approach to keep up with the CMAR. So we have not yet selected a CMAR. We're going to bring GHD on. They're going to finalize the design, bring the CMAR on, and then be able to plan out our next fiscal year. And we'll be coming back to the board each year with a budget request for the design services associated with GHD, very much like we've done for the Brown and Caldwell contract for River. And we're structuring it that same way. Since it is a 7-year
budget request, the agreement you'll be asking us to approve is for
tonight.
Multiple years.
Correct. Yes.
That's 6 to 7 million.
Correct. Tonight's $811,000 for this year, and then we've got it in the budget for next year.
Any further questions on that or the minutes from the last meeting? No further discussion. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving right on to committee updates, community meetings. Quick summary of Federation meeting last month. They were very encouraged by the sort of the resolution of some of the customer complaints associated with the cutover, and recognize that the temperature has dropped on those. Happy about that. They were very happy with the progress on River Renew, and very interested in the LEAP program. So a good update all the way around, and that's a very effective meeting to get to all the civic associations across town. So it's worthwhile. Anything from any other civic associations? Good. Let's hear from Finance and Audit on the proposed 2025 budget. Mr. Jenks.
Well, we met last night, and staff had presented their prepared draft operating and capital budget, including non-proposed rates and charges for next fiscal year. We're fortunate to have presence of the entire AlexRenew board, so I will not repeat everything I got said last night. You've all heard it. We will next discuss it, and on April 16th, we'll be asked to approve it, and then in May it goes to public hearing, and final approval by the board in June, subject to amendment now and then, and any of those, at least at the board meetings.
If we have any questions between now and then, just send them to Mr. Carl.
We did prepare some slides to respond to the few questions we did receive last night. We'd like to walk through those with the board.
Sure.
Also, in addition, community meetings, there is a health meeting on April the 8th that Ms. Bevis Carver, Mr. Coles will be presenting at an update on the Commonwealth Interceptor separate sanitary sewer area infiltration and inflow study. We got to really come up with a snazzier name for that. But it's a joint city AlexRenew effort where we're both looking at models and looking at different sources of inflows into the separate sanitary sewer system and ways to mitigate that. So it's just an update to PELT on our efforts.
For those of you who don't know, PELT is Rosemont Civic Association's planning, environment, land use, and transportation. Good. That'll be great. Okay. Go ahead with your update.
Yeah, so there's updated five updated slides in your green folders. The first is slide 8. So what we did is, at the request of the Finance and Audit Committee, is we broke down the revenues. There's a question about our 73 million of operating revenues. Where does that money go? So we tried to make it, went back and forth on this pretty much all day, trying to make this more visual. How is that money used? So 73 million on the left, it's showing wastewater charges, 60 million, Fairfax County operating expense charge at 12 million. And we line that up with the expense column on the right. You can see 12 million on expenses for Fairfax, 22 million for Alex only operating expenses, 19 million for debt service, and then 18 million of that 73 goes to our capital. And then we brought the budget numbers in here as well for the total 230 million. You can see Fairfax's contribution for capital is represented in both revenue and expense. And then our debt proceeds and other bond sources are represented as well on the left and right side of the page. So hopefully that provides the answer that the board was looking for with respect to a breakdown of those funds. There's an additional slide where we'll talk about billed flows here in a second.
I think this is very helpful. It tells people kind of, okay, where's your rate increase going?
And I think it's good conversation too, because we talked to the team this morning and said, hey, maybe we'll prepare the budget this way every year. So Steve left and right side of the page that it all ties together and it's balanced. Yeah. Slide 9, the next slide we included because there was we missed a number last night. It was 2.5 million off in the FY 2025 budget. This is the replacement slide, so it should be $230 million in FY 2025. So that's all the bottom line under total. Slide 10. Mr. Jinks, you asked a question about previous years' billed flows and what our projected billed flows were to support our line item for wastewater treatment charges. So what we're showing here is this is what we've got. This is where, going back to February, what we have in our rate model. We have our modeled revenues, actuals from FY 2021 through FY 2023. The modeled revenues are the first line, and then our actual revenues, you can see the rate model performed well with respect to those values within a % or less. And then you can see what we're projecting for billed flows looking ahead. FY 2024 model projected 57.1 million, 60 million FY 25, 63, 66. We know that we're going to be over our budget number on billed flows. We've underpredicted, but the model is what we're showing is that what we base rates on in the model, that it is accurate and supports our estimation for next year for 60.4.
I think this is helpful, and I think and this year, I think it's 3 million plus, we probably ought to be to the good. And then getting to where we're budgeting the model revenue. Very helpful, thank you.
Slide 11, Mr. Hill, your question last night, we took out the city charges and rounded out the decimals. The math now works.
Figured that out last night. Thank you for clarifying.
I was still struggling this morning. And then the last slide, the question came up last night about breaking down IT, slide 21, Laura. Ms. Huff. Thank you. We'll break down the IT costs. We just wanted to walk through the board, since the question did come up last night, that's $6 million. As we mentioned, about $2.5 million goes to our asset management program. That's a mix of software costs as well as non-professional services, the implementation side of things. $330,000 for hardware, computers, a lot of these specifically targeted for the lab. And we have a series of system upgrades as well in the IT line item. We have PLC upgrades. We're upgrading our ENS, our emergency notification system. That's both here at AlexRenew as well as at our remote sites. We're updating our telephone and wireless systems as well. And then you can see we've mentioned previously that we're investing in cybersecurity. We presented at the last meeting about $1.5 million of investments into cyber. Some of that is software. And some of that is also, we do have some staff augmentation through our IT department to support our cybersecurity program. Out of office expertise to support us.
These numbers are over a what long period of time?
This year,
1 year.
fiscal year 2025.
Thank you. That answers all the questions that came out of the meeting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anything else, Mr. James?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. Ms. Hammer, are you representing governance?
I am the only member of the committee here, but I believe these updates were developed by Mr. Jenks. Is that right? Would you like to give an overview of what they are?
Sure. This past fall, staff presented a work with the governance committee, quite a number of changes to various policies. There were some questions I had on some of the financial policies, so the board kind of asked on adopting those, and tonight we have proposed changes to the and the board committee policy. I should say these incorporate the changes staff proposed initially, and then additions basically that I made, most of which are clarification. There's really, I don't think anything that's new here that this really gets to reflect the terminology that's used by the auditor and accounting to match in our policy to match. If you looked at the auditor's letter, what the auditor said they're auditing for, we now have in the financial changes exactly the language that the auditor uses. In addition, these elaborate all the steps in the process that we've used, and not just some of them, it's just the way the policy's been worded up long term. So this goes to the clarification and kind of the laying out of what we have been doing, and in addition, I mean, we have been, for example, there was no discussion in the board committees about internal control. What's the process when the auditor says, hey, there's an issue you need to address? And so this has our process now laid out. So that's drafted and governance committee to us to consider.
Counselor, do we need to vote on this today?
We should,
I think probably should, right?
the boards, I think the emails that had been exchanged, at least with finance and audit, policies were in good shape.
So
Adopting them as updated policies, and then we'll send around new copies for the board.
okay, who would like to make a motion to?
Sure. Move to approve the recommended updates to the board committee's policy and the financial policy.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Mr. Jenks, I'll let you explain the derivatives policy to me at some point. Interest rate swaps and things like that.
There's a whole lot of detail in here that you would not find in most financial policies or organizations. Let those staff is comfortable having those in there.
I'm
That's
not
fine.
sure we're gonna ever invest derivatives. I can't see it. Good. Okay, moving right along. The next item is discuss compensation philosophy. Mr. Carlson, this is yours.
Yeah, so
Just to clarify though, this is employee compensation.
yeah, so the board has a employee compensation philosophy. We've discussed during the budget cycle to come to the board and present on our compensation study during the budget cycle. We're planning to do that in April. After we present to you all on the compensation study, we'd like to request some modifications be made to the board compensation philosophy, adding in pieces on other compensation outside of salary, including our benefits and other programs. We want to get through the discussion on the compensation study first and then schedule a governance meeting after the next board meeting to look more in detail at the compensation philosophy. We would circulate a draft in advance of the meeting for consideration. Okay. So get through the next board meeting. We would then draft a update to the compensation philosophy, distribute it to the board for review, and then set up a governance meeting. Discuss.
Okay, so we'll look forward to that. Does that cover the item for now?
Yes, and we were going to discuss your attendance at the next board meeting. We were going to try and work around that, but I think we've decided, given the timing of this compensation study, we're going to go ahead at the next meeting and review the compensation study. Then you'd be back to look at the philosophy after that at the government meeting.
If I can, I'll try to dial in.
On Monday,
It'll be late. Right?
Yeah.
6 hours.
Yeah.
It'll be late.
After.
Maybe.
Or you could just.
Or I could. Yeah, that's true. Good. I think that's the wiser course. Okay, moving right along. Unfinished business. Legal requirements related to funding a customer assistance program. Waters, we read your 12-page memo.
11 pages, the last one, intentionally left blank. A quick read, yes. Well, it's a pleasure to present on this issue. It has been somewhat of a labor of love, and this is an outgrowth of the board's commitment to provide affordable rates. And we discussed, I think it was last quarter, last calendar year, that we were going to do a full assessment of the legal barriers associated with using ratepayer revenue to fund a customer assistance program. And I've asked this question many times since I've been practicing law in this area, and I've always received the answer that it's illegal for authorities to consider any factors other than those that are listed in the Chapter 2, 5136. And while, if you've read the memo, you'll find that I eventually got to the conclusion that we would likely lose under the Dillon rule. I think it's a much closer call than anything that I've ever read before or understood before. So it was worthy of a full analysis, and there's actually quite a bit of case law out there. There's none directly on point, but there is some that would be used as persuasive. So the issues that were evaluated in this memo, the risks associated with funding a cap with ratepayer revenue, legal liability of it, but also the feasibility of lower risk alternatives. Considerations, as I mentioned, this has not been considered by the courts, this exact fact pattern. We all know we live in a Dillon rule state, which means that this controls the court's determination of the powers that the General Assembly has conferred upon localities and authorities. And the objective of the Dillon rule is to give effect to the intent of the General Assembly. And we're going to walk through this in a minute. Localities have only those powers that are granted to them expressly, or if it's implied that they have this authority, necessarily or fairly implied, or incident to powers expressly granted, or if it's essential or indispensable to the declared purpose of the locality or the authority. We're going to be focusing on two here because it's not expressed that factors other than those listed in the code can be considered. So we're really looking at, is it implied that an authority can consider other factors? Legal review, the first step that a court would look at is that Dillon rule assessment. Is there power to consider those factors? And it's not just income, it's really any factor other than those listed. And if it is fairly implied, then is the authority's consideration of income in setting those rates? Is it just, equitable, fair, and reasonable? And stop me as I go along if you have any questions. So now I'd like to walk you through what's in the memo as to how a court would most likely approach this. And I've put up here, we'll get into the locality side in a second when we get to precedent, but first we're going to focus on the left-hand side, and this is the Virginia Code 5136, mostly subsection C. So the language states that rates shall be just and equitable. And fair and reasonable comes into play in subsection D. It's also applicable in general. I don't know why they set up these somewhat different terms, but they all basically mean the same. They're not defined in the code, but they mean the same. Then it goes into, it says, shall be just and equitable and may be based upon, and that's where the factors come in. Water consumption, number, kind of plumbing fixtures, water outlets, average number residing, working in the facility. Any other factors affecting the use of facilities. And then it has the catch-all that says any combination of these factors. There's no other discretion given to authorities in the code, no mention of income whatsoever in the code. So what a court would first do under the first step, the Dillon rule analysis, is they would look at the plain meaning of the words in the code. And what makes this ambiguous is that they put in shall, which is mandatory, and then they use the word may, which is permissive. So you would think that if they just wanted, if the General Assembly only wanted these factors to be considered, there's no reason to add the word may in. It would be, shall be just and equitable and be based upon the following factors. So that makes a lens towards some ambiguity, which would take the court to the next step, which is looking at legislative history. Legislative history, there isn't much legislative history in Virginia. There really isn't any legislative history here. This is the language that has existed since this provision of the code was enacted. It has not been changed. So then they would move on and they would start to do employ rules of statutory construction. Virginia actually includes for the General Assembly for the code, they have a section of the code that talks about how the code should be interpreted. And they include definition of some words, such as the word includes or including. They don't have may, but includes or including. So where you have a list and it says this and you can consider these including, then that means including but not limited to. So what they're saying is if you have that word in there, then you can consider those factors, but you can consider other factors. May is similar to including in the way it functions. But the problem here is that they say may, and had they left out this last one and any combination of these factors, then I would think it's permissive. You can consider these, you can consider others. But they put in this limitation, any of the above, which again, just creates just a lot of ambiguity about whether they meant for authorities to be able to consider things other than those listed here. So the courts would next turn to precedent. And as I said, this is a case of first impression. There is no case law directly on point, but there are a lot of decisions with localities, not with authorities. So in those decisions, we typically see that they're jumping over this first step because we're talking about rates, we're talking about zoning, we're talking about things where there's clearly the authority to set rates. So they jump straight into whether it's then fair, reasonable, and that analysis. And so it doesn't really, the case law for localities isn't going to help us much with step one. If an authority were able to get beyond step one to the second question of, okay, so there is an implied authority. Are the rates and the impact, is it just, equitable, fair, reasonable? There, an authority could easily win because the courts are going to apply, it's a legislative enactment. Even for authorities, there's one decision from 2020 that says that for authorities setting rates, that there is a presumption of validity because it is a legislative enactment, and that pertains to separation of powers. So a court is not going to step in where the General Assembly has granted authority to a locality or an authority to set rates. The court is not going to step in and try to interpret then what is reasonable. So they're going to give deference if the locality or authority puts any evidence forth to show that the rates are reasonable, then a court is going to side with the locality or authority. It's the highest level of deference you can get in court is highly deferential. So given this analysis, the hurdle is the first step. I'm just not certain that we could get beyond it. So there are a lot of risks associated with proceeding, given that we have no case law on point. And that's what we don't have this table or this chart in the legal analysis. This is something that assesses the risks of various options that we could use. And the first one is plowing forward, implementing a rate funded cap, whether that be a lifeline rate or a discount after the effect. And we get legally challenged. The risk there is that we're going to be engaged in lengthy litigation. Of course, it's very costly. The amount of staff time and the amount of upper management executive team staff time that would have to be spent defending this litigation would be substantial. We face potential reputation damage, and then this won't just impact AlexRenew, it impact the other 30 plus authorities in the state. So there we figured that, and this would be a challenge brought by a ratepayer that was subsidizing the program. So we think the likelihood here, 3, conservatively, the impact, should this occur, 5. So the risk ranking is 15. And there we say, just given that risk level, the best thing to do, we cannot mitigate, we should avoid. The second risk is related, is that we proceed, then we get a negative decision, and we actually have to repay to those subsidizing the cap, we'd have to repay those amounts. So that is a void as well. The third option is interesting. So this is going to the General Assembly, and I know we discussed this before. So it's going to the General Assembly to ask them to revise or to get somebody to carry a bill to revise the language of 5136 to add in a factor for consideration of income, or at the very least, remove any ambiguity that other factors could be considered. And here, the risk if we were to do that without coordinating with others is that we could have other authorities not support this legislation. We could potentially have the code opened up and changed in a way that is worse than the status quo. And for that one, we are saying right now, we should not proceed until and unless we're able to coordinate with other authorities and really come up with a legislative plan to go and educate the General Assembly about why this is needed, make sure there isn't going to be opposition, try to get, this may be a multi-year endeavor trying to make sure that we don't make things worse than they are right now. So for that particular one, we're saying not right now. And then the last one is getting an attorney general opinion. And this is discussed in the memo. It's non-binding. We get an attorney general opinion. We then rely upon that in implementing rate revenue funded cap. We're pretty much in the same position. It doesn't provide a shield to litigation. So if we're sued, then we're really right back up here as far as the risks associated. Because so that is really, that's not going to give us anything more than the legal advice of the attorney general. So given all of this, our recommendation is that for now, we have the conversation with other authorities to see what appetite there is in changing the code, while at the same time, we continue to explore some ways to fund our existing LEAP with non-rate payer revenue. And we have several revenue sources that we're looking at. We see the participation level in that hardship program. And at the same time, we'll start up the disconnections in July. We'll get a better sense of the affordability challenges, the pockets of affordability challenges in our service area. And then in another year from now, we'll have a much better picture to present on where we need to address these issues and how, whether we have the support of other authorities to go to the General Assembly, whether we have a participation level that isn't even starting to drain the money that we have in LEAP. So I think that's where we landed, but it's a lot of information we presented to you. So I would love to hear your questions or thoughts or any considerations that we did not take into account.
Ms. Hammer? Oh, sorry, Mr. Jenks, go ahead.
I had one other thing that occurred to me. It's a very good memo and I appreciate all the work that you put into this. I would agree that the legislature is kind of the best route. The question though, there's another statute that applies to localities, that is names particular localities. What about if we amended that? So we'd be allowed amendment because it's Richmond and 2 towns.
Yes.
And add us to the list so that in effect, we wouldn't be asking every other authority in the state to go along.
Yes.
What about that as an option?
This only happened a few years ago. So this started in 2014, this addition to the localities, 2009. And it began as allowing any locality to, by ordinance, to develop a program for discounted rates. And then there was a lot of amendments and it came into play that it was any locality with 200 or less people per square mile, which is very few localities in the state, and Richmond. Then a few years later, they added the towns of Louisa and Alta Vista. Doesn't say here that you can or cannot use ratepayer revenue. I know Richmond is implementing this without ratepayer revenue, but the point is that even localities with all this discretion, they still felt like they needed to go and get some additional language for authority. So this would be a way to proceed and just either leave it blank as to how you fund it, or even try to get something similar in the Authorities Act that allows income to be considered, or allows ratepayer revenue to be used to fund the program. So I think that is a good option. It'd have to be an amendment though to our section of the code to be applicable to us. But there's precedent for it. These passed with 1 or 2 opposing votes in the House. So there was an appetite from the General Assembly to allow this.
And it's a common tool in the state code. It's just kind of like, well, not everybody else wants to go along, but okay, so we'll define it as less than 200. They knew who they were who they were covering in that math, but didn't say so. So there are plenty of precedents for getting laws changed that only affect one locality or one entity. in.
Mr. Jinks, are you looking at potentially getting Alexandria, Virginia added to the localities list?
Adding AlexRenew added, because of Alexandria. I think that there's also another statute in the state code that
Yeah.
the city has used, and I know Arlington has used for decades. And there's a health and welfare statute somewhere that basically says that localities can do things to aid the health and welfare of their residents.
Mhm.
And tax relief programs and housing subsidy programs that's been the hook.
Mhm.
When the explicit authority didn't exist somewhere else in the legislature, that at least those two localities, and Charlottesville was another one, who followed Alexandria on the real estate tax relief piece
Mhm.
and did the same thing. So somewhere there is also generic language that a number of localities have said was enough,
Mhm.
that they didn't need to go there.
And you're right about there's so many, even within our section of the code, there's so many provisions that apply just to certain localities. So this happens all the time where you go in and you get authority. But if we went into here and added Alexandria, we would still have the issue of us not having explicit authority. Alexandria would then, but AlexRenew would not.
Bill on behalf of the city for the
Yeah.
third bill.
I
It's a foot in it. It seems like a foot in the door.
Yeah, it does.
I would be interested in seeing a comparison of the like pros and cons of amending the code to change the factors versus just putting in an AlexRenew specific exemption. Like what would be the legal pros and cons? Obviously, the the dynamics around whether we can build a coalition and some politics of going one route versus the other, but I'm wondering if there's a legal reason why we might. Versus the other.
Yes, we can do that. We can do that definitely. And that, as we start to talk to the other authorities, if there is no interest in moving forward, then I think us changing these factors, because they would affect everybody, might not be the most popular approach. But doing something like this, where it just impacts us, would be preferable. But we can do pros and cons and
I think if something affects us, it's back up.
Yeah.
In my mind, to try to get it as generic legislation, and it appears that's not going to work, then I'll back up. Something that impacts only
Well,
us.
the thing is, it would affect everyone in the Commonwealth, just not explicitly, because as you pointed out, the fact that those localities sought out that exemption, to me, now having that in there kind of shows that the existing language on the factors does not include income because they had to add it separately.
Yeah.
So now if I'm another locality that's not on that list, I have basically like lost the ambiguity that could have covered
Yes.
my ability to establish rates based on income. So if we were on the parallel side with the authorities, if we were to get an exception written into the code, then that would almost like, I think, foreclose the option for other authorities in the state. So one way or the other, it would affect others besides us.
And I would have argued that for localities, that they really had authority to do this before this. And by doing this, it then foreclosed that argument for others, as you said. It makes it seem like, well, there wasn't the authority, therefore that's why they needed to go and get.
Have you or anyone talked with anyone who's involved in those, like seeking those changes?
I'm trying to get in touch with Alta Vista. Richmond has their Metro Care program that we have an analysis of. We know how that's funded, but I'm curious. Louisa has not yet begun a program. Alta Vista's got it out there, and they may very well fund it with rate revenue, but I also want to know more about their path to getting this approved and why there weren't others.
Seems likely to me that they did like a very similar assessment,
Yeah.
And came to the same conclusion, which, by the way, like I completely agree with your conclusions in the memo. I think if it were to be litigated, it's a winnable case, but doing something that's going to possibly get us sued is kind of seen as a last resort. when we have other options going through legislation. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about your concerns with unfavorable changes, like unintended unfavorable changes to this to
Yeah.
the code.
Yeah, Justin and I spoke, Mr. Carl and I spoke about this before coming down. Where if we didn't have support and we didn't do some legwork beforehand, we could have more conservative contingent come in and foreclose the opportunity to consider income. Just make it clear that income is not a factor that's appropriate for consideration. There could be, potentially as they open it up, looking at our disconnections, maybe tinkering with that. So the fear is that given that what we've just gone through with the General Assembly and trying to fix what was happening with the Virginia Public Procurement Act, we're just concerned with how that came about, the lack of understanding of implications down there, how quickly it moves and can get out of control. So while we, if we do a lot of legwork in advance and work with the General Assembly to build up to this, we'll feel more comfortable than just going and trying to find a sponsor and then letting it, leaving it to the fate of the path of the General Assembly. If you want to add anything, Mr. Collins?
Yeah, I think so. The experience we just went through, both Ms. Waters, myself, and some of our team, with this year's General Assembly, there were changes to design, build, and CMAR, construction manager at risk, sections of the code. And the whole code section got opened, and it was really opened first for public institutions like college, schools, and universities. But it ended up then getting funneled throughout the entire section of the code where it started to impact us. And we picked up on this, on a Friday, and by the next week, it had already gone through some of the subcommittees and got approved with 40 to 0, 99 to 0. And what we found through that process is there was bartering going on behind the scenes, but nobody actually really knew the nuanced language that was changing in the code and what that was doing to us. And we caught wind of it and tried to course correct. But unfortunately, we're going to end up this year. We'll have to come back to you again this year with a policy change for procurement, is we can no longer shortlist based on qualifications of previous design build experience or CMAR experience at the shortlist phase. It was, you shall not consider it. When we got involved, you shall not consider it at all. We can at least consider it an award, which is kind of silly in our sense at the second step, but we cannot shortlist based on design build or CMAR experience any longer. In addition to that, we are coming to the board now. Every time we want to use CMAR on a specific project, we will come to the board and seek your approval to be able to use it. And there's a few reasons for that, to, again, give some of the smaller contractors an ability to voice their opinion on disusing that type of procurement method in the state. We're all worse off than where we started this process back in January. And it was eye-opening to both Ms. Waters and myself to see how freely changes were made and how little thought was put into some of these changes, even though it's striking a single word that seems very small, but it affects us pretty significantly. So I get, when we kind of talk about that risk, that we're worried about not just language around the way we set rates, but also could the whole document, the whole code section be scrutinized by someone who wants to, give us less liberties or something along those lines. So that was just eye-opening for us this year. We're coming out of it a little shell-shocked,
Yeah.
but
And the bandwidth it took, and we would be pushing this, so we would be on top of it a little bit earlier, but the bandwidth that it took for us to stay abreast of all the changes and the directions, and we don't have a huge staff, so it was a lot of our time spent trying to control that. And we just cautioned that we really would need to do a lot in advance of trying to move this to make sure that it does go the direction that we intend.
If we could, let's stay on that point about bandwidth. This organization's ability to do multiple things at the same time. Think about where we are. We have whatever, 800, 900 accounts that are past due. We have $1 million or so in arrears. We are going to start a disconnection program in the summer. That's the bad news. The good news is we have a LEAP program that we set up in record time and have $20,000+ to assist our needy ratepayers. I'm worried that if we pursue this, which is worthwhile, but we can't do everything at the same time, are we jeopardizing our ability to really execute the LEAP program well? And we've never run a program like LEAP, certainly not at the scale that this could be. I'm wondering, because we have limited resources, should we focus those resources on doing LEAP right and trying to generate as much income as we can for that program, which I think you've got some great ideas on how to do that, and really rolling out LEAP well so that nobody gets disconnected? Because that's really the outcome we want to avoid in the short term, right? So, Mr. Carl or Ms. Waters, if you could speak to how much energy it's going to take to do LEAP right over the next year. It's not going to execute itself. I mean, maybe Mr. Robertson would know more about that, but. Yeah.
Well, I think there's two questions here. One, I think the memo that Ms. Waters developed, we don't want it to come to the board and then just fizzle out. I think the effort that she put forth in developing the analysis and case studies to support the analysis is not something that's been put out there previously in the industry, at least in this state that we've seen. There was a whole memo done by UNC that didn't go into this level of detail. And I think it would be in our best interest to start to share that memo with other firms and other authorities in the state. We are still getting that. What did I write in that? What did we get? It's almost certainly illegal response off the cuff when we start to discuss it, but we haven't really sat down and had a long conversation with some of the other authorities, or we haven't shared it with our legal peers in the state either. So I think that we want to do the memo justice and at least get it out there and get feedback from the industry. It's public now, but you're the first to see it. The LEAP portion is, we do have our communications team to support us. I think our goal right now between the executive team is to try and come up with unique ways to fund LEAP. And I think that's something we're focused on right now. And that'll take the better portion of the next few months to be able to identify and structure the right language around some of these funding avenues. Two of those are the billing services agreement we have with the city of Alexandria, as well as the city's use of our 5th floor. We recently executed a letter of intent with the city to lease a portion of the 5th floor for their test group. Aaron's aware of this. And what that would mean is we could take funds that we collect from the city and have them donated directly to LEAP, and it never touches us as revenue. We are working with our bond council to look at the indenture as well and looking to see if there's other avenues of non-revenue that we can use for LEAP. And if we're correct in our analysis, we'll have anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000 per year to put into LEAP, in addition to donations, roundup programs. That's per year. And I think the guidance we've gotten from Dollar Energy is to see how this goes for the first year. But I think while that's happening, we'd certainly like to do this memo justice and have discussions with the other authorities.
Oh, please don't misinterpret me. I'm not diminishing any of the good work you did. And I understand it was an incredible piece of analysis. I just want to be careful to keep our eye on the LEAP ball, because this is a real program. We're now beyond exploration. We're into execution now. Correct. A program we've never done before. Correct. And it's affecting perhaps as many as 800 accounts, depending on how things go. I I mean, hopefully, but we don't even know how big the need is right now.
How much of the day-to-day implementation of LEAP is done by Dollar Energy as opposed to?
Yeah, Matt, Mr. Robertson, probably.
Yeah, so we work closely with them on pretty much every call that they're on, but they do take the lead and do a lot of the legwork on some of the implementation. They have their own software. They connect with the partners directly, help onboard them. So they do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think to Mr. Hill's point, it would be nice to see kind of how that evolves the need for it over time. And I think Dollar Energy has echoed that same thought, like you implement a program like this, sort of set your guidelines and see if you need to make adjustments over time after a few months, 6 months, something like that.
But the point that Mr. Carl made, there are other, perhaps large sources of revenue we might be able to use for LEAP. And I know that doesn't happen automatically.
No,
It's going to take analysis
Similar analysis.
and legal review and all kinds of
We may
things.
want to re-examine our eligibility criteria to make it available to more than those
Right.
are just subject to shut off. So we have a lot we can do. We've set the criteria. We can change those as we see how
Yeah.
many people are taking advantage of it, how much of our balance is, starting to tick down and.
Because what I worry about is, I don't think we know how our ratepayers are going to react once we start doing cutoffs. And I want us to be nimble and able to help them with a program like LEAP. If we find out that we need more money in the LEAP fund, I want us to be able to move very quickly to find that funding and line it up and carry it out. This strikes me as a very important long-term approach, but a long-term approach. And we have a short-term problem. I mean, cut-ups are going to happen in July, right? That's right around the corner.
And just to be clear, we are going to be
Please, of course.
to be looking, we will continue to work on this. I know Mr. Carl will be going to the Virginia Water and Wastewater Authorities Association meeting in a few weeks. This isn't on the agenda, but you're going to talk to other authorities, start to take their temperature. We'll do this with BAMWA. So we are going to be setting, doing the groundwork to set the stage for this, but we just are recommending, let's wait and implement LEAP until we.
Please go
Well,
ahead.
just on the point about near term and long term, LEAP is a tremendous accomplishment and it's going to materially improve the lives of a lot of people, but it's not a long term solution to rate affordability. It's not a structural solution. It's one-off assistance. So if someone's truly unable to afford to pay, they're going to get the assistance, but they'll end up back in the same place because the rate continues to be unaffordable for them. Not to mention just like the stress that someone is already, when the LEAP program is, once they're already in the position of considering it, it's because, their service has been threatened to be disconnected. I mean, it's not a permanent solution in the same way that, reducing the person's rate to like a level they can afford is a permanent solution. So I'm very mindful of the workload considerations. But I think it would be a shame to not proceed with longer term, given it will be a longer term effort for sure, given the work that's going to be required to put together, hopefully a coalition of authorities that are interested in this, and then building, information on within the General Assembly and getting it to a point where we're comfortable that the risk is low enough to proceed. Maybe that's not next session, maybe it's a session after that or after that. But I think it would be good if we had, and what I meant to say is, and then in the meantime, collecting the LEAP data is going to be extremely important, as everyone said. But it would be good to have like a plan for when to proceed. When do we have enough data on LEAP? Because we don't want to get into a paralysis by analysis situation. We're like, oh, we just need one more year of LEAP data. or,
by the way, that's a very good point.
Ms. Hammer, you're saying, proceed on parallel tracks, right?
Yeah.
right.
And I think that is the intent. And
Yeah.
as far as when we would take that next step, I do think we're going to have a lot more intel 6 months from now than we are today, as far as what do other authorities think? How is LEAP going? And do we need to tweak LEAP? Because it doesn't have to be one time. I know it's not the same as a discount or a lifeline rate, but we have control over how we structure that program to be much broader if we have the funding for it. But we'll do this on parallel tracks and we'll keep you updated. And
We have reached out to authorities. It's not like we did this in a vacuum. We've asked where some of the other authorities are going, kind of just in passing conversation, trying to get a feel for is there going to be an appetite for this. But there's 33 authorities that participate in VWWAA. We've talked to some of our local authorities. We haven't gotten quite the warm and fuzzy we were hoping from some of them, but we still need to be able to have those discussions, move the conversation forward. But I think for us, that was our intent from the intent of the memo is to build LEAP structurally. We might be able to come up with a way to have some discounts applied to certain customers' bills once we find them and have that recur, because we will have a much larger pot of funding than when we initially thought when we launched LEAP. So that could help be a stopgap in between LEAP and a long-term sort of cap, if we can get there on the cap. But our intent on LEAP is not to stop at emergency assistance. We have the ability to, with Dollar Energy, to take it to the next level of a cap, just not a cap funded with rate revenue. And I think the funding sources we're coming up with, I think, are just as important as what we've identified in the memo. So we've been kind of moving both forward at the same time.
I think I agree that we've got to be cautious about taking on too much, but I think the General Assembly is kind of, you kind of lay the groundwork, you see where the interest is. I'm not sure who, sometimes you end up with somebody who patrons whose specialty, who's the expert in the General Assembly and like environmental bills. Think of a certain delegate from Fairfax County who's involved in that and has seniority, and if you get somebody who's going, that's a great idea. Area, I chair the subcommittee, and I've had things that you just happen to get the right person and bingo. They're the one that was respected when they say this is the way to do it, and it doesn't result getting sometimes you're running up against a brick wall and don't find anybody, and then you're like trying to figure out what to do. So also Virginia Municipal League,
yes,
it's an option. They have a finance committee who, I'm not sure that's exactly the name of it, who basically looks and comes forward in the fall time period with their legislative package of things that they'd like to see, and it's fairly generic kind of, it isn't specific bills, but it's at least there's another entity to potentially and the Association of Counties as well to kind of get on board with the idea instead of building up the coalition that it's not just us by ourselves.
Okay, so to make sure this issue doesn't die and we continue on two tracks, maybe let's set a date when we revisit everything. And what seems reasonable? We need 6 months of LEAP, I think, to figure out where we are, right?
I think we're probably going to be coming to the board, and this, if it's not a standing agenda item, it's going to be at every other meeting, because there's updates we're going to have to give to the board on where we're at in funding. The intent would be to put something in the monthly report.
Okay.
And have it as a topic to discuss and touch on at every board meeting.
Yeah.
Because there are other legal analysis going on right now related to the master indenture that we haven't even gotten into. It was in the memo. It was 15 pages. I'm like, Ms. Waters and I were like, it's too much.
By the way,
This was in the memo, it's too much. So we took it out, but there are other legal avenues we're exploring right now as well to kind of be more strategic around how we get non-rate revenue, to give us a bigger pot to help out the issues you brought up, Ms. Hammer.
Yeah.
We are aware of that.
I worry when people think there's such a thing as a self-implementing program.
Well, no, I think
No such thing.
Mr. Robertson is very kind. I mean, right now we're figuring out how the checks go from Dollar Energy to ESC. ECS or
Oh,
ESC?
yes, see.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to figure out how it applies at the back end. That is.
To apply to the back end and get programmed in back to us. And, you know, that is, you know, it's the day-to-day work is, you know, subcontracted out, but how to do that is coming from us to our vendor. So I think that, you know, there's meetings every day when you turn around on this, and there's the whole piece on how we're going to deal with our late fees that are coming back in. So there's a lot of balls in the air right now in getting this stuff sorted out. But I think we can move both forward at the same time. A lot of the fourth row there is conversations, and myself and Ms. Waters attend enough association and conferences where we can have those discussions with the other authorities. And we have been, and just more offhand and not, hey, did you read this memo? We haven't done that yet.
Mr. Crowe, do you feel you have enough guidance from the board at this point? You do? Okay.
Yes.
And let me say, I think this organization is so enriched because we have a lawyer, very experienced lawyer on staff, very experienced lawyer on the board, and a former city manager. I mean, this was just an incredible, deep discussion about this issue. I mean, could only follow about half of it, but
Well, I want to say I just really appreciate all the work that you've put into this. Thank you. It was a really good memo. I read it on Saturday afternoon. It was just a great time.
the lawyers on a Saturday afternoon.
One additional thing, you also mentioned it here is Virginia American Waters
Yeah.
seeking a authority from the State Corporation Commission to basically do what we've been talking about doing, is set a lower rate for lower income customers. The State Corporation Commission has a comment period to which anybody can make comments, and I know that the city's going to be making comments of some kind. And the State Corporation Commission listens to those because frankly, they don't get many comments. So when they get one from a governmental entity, they pay attention. And I think it'd be useful for us to not take a position on the rate increase for Virginia American Water, but just say to the State Corporation Commission, we think this is a good idea and it's something that you ought to approve.
Yeah.
And we think it's a good idea in concept, and we think it's something that merits your consideration and approval, something like that. Because that, if they do that, then it gets the ball rolling in a sense. We can point to that and say to general sentiment, well, the water company is doing it, and therefore we'd like to, and it helps our ratepayers as well.
Yeah.
In an indirect way, it takes pressure off of them, which helps make our bills a little more affordable.
And there's a way to do that without addressing the 25% rate increase, just supporting it. Come terrible.
And we've been coordinating with Ryan Freed from the city to understand where the comments are going from the city. We had one call with him so far, but I think we'll circle back with them and let them know that we'd like to see where their thoughts are, and also we can, as an entity, make our own comment as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and now we're moving on to new business and an overview of environmental justice assessment. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just thriving. Love that.
Shaping the organization. Exactly why we do.
Environmental justice assessment. So I'm just going to introduce our speakers and then turn it over to Ms. Jenks. Rosie Jenks, she is with Brown and Caldwell, and to read some of your great bio, but you're the Vice President and the National Specialty Leader in Stormwater and Nature-Based Solutions. You're leading the Brown and Caldwell Equity Community of Practice. You've supported several large cities in reimagining drainage and sewer systems to advance climate resilience, community benefits, and equity. And prior to joining Brown and Caldwell, she worked for 12 years for the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. She's going to talk a lot about her experience there in relation to environmental justice and equity. And we also have a familiar face with Priyanka Shaha, did I pronounce that right? Who is a civil engineer, associate civil engineer with Brown and Caldwell. She is going to be serving as liaison between Ms. Jinks and our staff in this assessment. And we also have Kelvin Coles, who you know very well, who's also part of this process. We were in December when we passed the environmental justice policy and the new class policy that defined environmental justice as the equitable treatment and meaningful engagement of our residents, inclusive of all races, cultures, lifestyles, neighborhoods, and incomes, so we may advance our mission in managing the community's wastewater without placing disproportionate environmental burdens on those we serve. And our policy sets forth 13 commitments. We've grouped those somewhat differently here into 8. The first one is the assessment that we'll be talking about today. Second one is internally focused, developing guidance and conducting training, meaningfully engage stakeholders and practice active listening, develop diverse communication strategies and engaging educational programs, make decisions considering the community's history, develop strategies to support equitable rates. We just had a little discussion about that, and coordination with the city as well as continuous improvement. That I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Thank you.
And over here. Thanks so much for having me tonight, as you all. Flew out from San Francisco. And the team asked me to talk a little bit about our experiences and some best practices in implementing environmental justice and equity policies. And I can't really speak for the entire country, but I can speak for our companies and my personal experience. And as you can see, AlexRenew is in good company with a bunch of forward-looking agencies and cities. And as anchor institutions, a lot of water organizations in general are really thinking about not only how can they look internally at their own business practices and hiring and procurement policies, but to look externally and how they can use the act of investment and operating their systems to better the community and outcomes in the community they serve. So we've supported the cities that are mapped here. And as you can see, a lot of them, and the majority of them right now are really looking at planning processes. That's because I'm a planner. And so I work on a lot of plans before projects get built. But a subset of them, Boise, Idaho, Portland Grove Environmental Services, and Raleigh, North Carolina, have used our services to help them really think organizationally about how they can start to use these policies that are often vague and sort of broad statements and really bring them into the daily organizations and really think about what changes today about what we do, what we used to do based on these new policies and decision-making factors, really. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the work at San Francisco because it's the more mature program that I've worked with and give you some of the innovative practices to sort of give you a taste of what I think we can bring to you as an organization and really just learn from the benchmark. So I was there from 2005 to 2017. And while I was there in 2009, our commission also adopted environmental justice policy. In 2011, they adjusted what's called a community benefits policy. So it's really the intersection of those two policies that really sort of informed the decision-making and the planning work that we did. So at that time, I was leading our collection system planning for the whole city and was really charged with how to figure out how to take these big policy ideas and weave them into our decision-making around capital planning and also engagement. And so at that time, we basically just used social and demographic criteria to prioritize alongside infrastructure needs, how we would prioritize and engaging the community. And we rolled out our 8 demonstration projects. And one of the problems that we ran into is that at every meeting, we were seeing the same 5 activists and a whole lot of city staff and consultants and very few representatives of the neighborhood. And so we developed something called the Equitable Engagement Guidelines. And what that was a requirement for all of our project managers before starting any planning or basic design project to do a demographic analysis of the neighborhood, and then to be able to show targeted outreach strategies that were demographically and statistically representative. And so they had to continuously go out with new engagement strategies until it was representative. And that's really unusual in utilities in general. There's often a lot of, just checking off. We gave out the flyers and whoever comes, and then that's the end. But it was really sort of this proactive, go out and reach out type of an approach. So for an example, we had in the Mission District in San Francisco is a really heavily Latino community. And as we did our first round of outreach, we found that there were no youth really represented. So our team went out to the high school and took our watershed planning game and played it with several student groups. And then they were able to achieve their numbers. And there was just like a really high touch factor with the community that I think was a lot more impactful than it would have been if we hadn't had this policy. Let's see. And the community benefits policy is a really unique one as well. It really goes beyond sort of having procurement policies about teaming arrangements with, sort of prime firms teaming with small disadvantaged firms. And in San Francisco, there's a policy that makes anyone that's receiving a contract larger than $5 million have to put together a community benefits plan. And so it's a voluntary plan, but all the vendors going forth for the agency trying to get these contracts have to show either in-kind work or donations and some sort of community partnership that's addressing a range of challenges that are facing the community that are in service. And what this does is it really puts the vendors in sort of ongoing relationship with the community that they're serving. It provides a way of sort of harnessing the active procurement to just sort of cascade into the community right away as soon as the agency is built anything. And it's just about the act and the process of doing it. And so these really can just range in all sorts of different ways that we can help you in terms of implementing your plan, but I just wanted to give you a taste of some of the types of things that are out there and really help you figure out through this process what's the right mix for AlexRenew in the communities that you're serving. Next slide. So this is the assessment overview. 3 phases, that's quite simple. Right here, we're giving the board update right now. We've already established the framework and the scope of work, how we're going to go forward. We're going to start out by collecting data, just reviewing your documents, your policies, your procedures that you have in place, sort of the relationships that you have in the city with other ongoing equity and environmental justice actions. We're going to conduct listening sessions with the staff and other key stakeholders. We're going to come back to you and give you a board update based on what we found. We're going to just evaluate the data and identify opportunities and really use that benchmarking data that I was talking about earlier from other cities. And then we're going to create recommendations and strategies, come back to the board again. And then when phase 3 kicks off, that will be really about starting to implement the recommendations. And we don't know what the recommendations are yet because we haven't started the work, but they can take the form of program design, it could be studies, it could be further research, partnership development, etc. That's basically the overview. With the data collection and listening sessions, we're going to try to really look at your historical information, looking at mapping and demographic analysis, looking at the extent of the work that you do in the neighborhoods and the types of impacts that we'll be looking at. And do a deeper dig into the demographics and do again that benchmarking I was talking about. And when we talk with the staff and representative stakeholders, we're going to learn how you identify and choose capital projects, how you make and document decisions, what your community engagement looks like, and what kind of metrics you use to track, and really dig into what your procurement and spending policies look like, and what sort of strategies you might be employing to address rates and affordability. So we know that in our experience that you can be thoughtful and systematic and really start to apply these policies to all phases of the work and all the kind of activities that you do in an organization. And can range from capital planning and design guidelines, partnerships with the community, procurement policies like I mentioned. And so this process, we'll just keep working with you to make sure that the best practices that we're trying to bring forward are really aligned with your culture and the neighbors and the neighborhoods that you're serving. Yeah, and we're just thrilled to be invited to do this work with you and get to know you better and try to help you move things forward. So I'll stop here and we'll have some questions at the end, but I'll hand this over to my colleague. Yeah.
Hi again. So here you're looking at the map, yeah, the city of Alexandria, of course, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. But what we wanted to do here is give you a visual representation of AlexRenew's routine. So in navy blue, we have AlexRenew's 4 interceptors and 5 pumping stations. So it just shows how widely distributed some of the industry is, even though it's quite small in comparison to other municipalities. As a part of this assessment, we're going to be looking at opportunities for environmental justice implementation. We're going to be looking to the past. So, for example, looking at AlexRenew, one of the great instances of one of the things that we're going to be pulling from there is the great communication strategies that have happened throughout the program, through listening sessions, through the stakeholder advisory group, which is a great liaison throughout the Alexandria community. Some of the current future projects that we've identified are the Commonwealth Interceptor Infiltration and Inflow Study, which is in the area of Delray. And then on the left side, we have the Holmes Run Trunk Sewer Relining Program and the 4 mile run pump station upgrades on the north side of Alexandria. So these are some projects within the community, but we're going to also be looking at opportunities inward, looking at AlexRenew's workforce, and then also taking a look at AlexRenew's impact on the city as a whole. So, for example, through communication strategies and sewer rates and affordability. Awesome. There. And so one of the main goals here will be creating repeatable and consistent processes that will be inherent to AlexRenew's operation, whether it be in projects within the community or projects at the plant. But of course, Alexandria is not the only entity pursuing the goals of environmental justice. The city of Alexandria has the All Alexandria Initiative, which is a resolution committing to race and social equity within the city. A couple of the tools that they've developed so far include the Racial Equity Toolkit, which is a step-by-step guideline to taking a racial equity lens to work that's done within the city. And then also the Equity Index Maps, which is an interactive map where you can take a look at racial equity, and that takes into consideration several indices, including income, affordability, educational opportunity, to name a few. And so here we just want to highlight that one of the key goals of the assessment will to be aligning AlexRenew's efforts with the city initiative and to leverage some of that work that's been done so far in future assessment. So taking a look at this map again, we wanted to give you an example of some of the data collection and evaluation that we will be doing. We took a look at the racial equity map and pulled out one of those key indices, median income, in regards to how it is across the city. So the city of Alexandria is often viewed as a more wealthy area, with the median income being over $113,000. However, that's not the case for all Alexandrians. And so on this map, we've highlighted in yellow those areas in which the median household income is less than $80,000, which is almost 30% less than the median across the city. And so this is just an example of what we'll be doing graphically, taking a look at demographics and seeing the intersection with some of the opportunities. For example, the Holmes Run Trunk Sewer Relining Program. That's right in the middle of some of those census tracts and where the income is less than 80,000. And then the 4 Mile Run pump station upgrades as well. That's pretty close to another one of those areas. So really here, we're just giving you an example of some of the demographic analyses that we're going to be doing. And we'll be going into much deeper, taking a harder look at the intersection of all of these throughout the assessment. So this demographic analysis is just the beginning, and we will be layering this with a lot more evaluations to be informing the type of work that AlexRenew does to ensure that the assessment itself is successful. And so we're excited to be here and work with AlexRenew. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you can ask myself or always Ms. Jenks and Mr. Pulse.
Let me jump in and get it started, but I know others want to jump in. Just to get done. One, I'm glad you're here. And two, I'm glad we're doing this. There's one thing that has become clear as we kind of stood up the LEAP program and dealt with our unpaid bills. We don't really understand our ratepayers. We think they look like us, you know? And some do, but there are whole areas in the city that pay their bills in different ways through different processes, and we don't see them. And I think one thing that perhaps this study could open up our eyes on is what is really the distribution of our ratepayers, and how do they interact with us when they pay their bills? Some pay directly, but some pay through the landlord and that sort of thing. But we still impact them with our bill. And I think the more we can understand that sort of diversity and folks who pay our bills, I think that the more informed we'll be, and I think the better decisions we'll make. So if you can help with that, that'd be great.
Any other questions?
I'm really looking forward to seeing what sorts of analyses you're going to be doing, like what sort of different things you're going to overlay with the demographic data. Like looking at where the work is being done, I think is important, but also I'm wondering if there's a way to look at like where are people experiencing basement backups? Where are people exposed to like discharges in the environment? Like, are there people who recreate like near outfalls? So are those all different sorts of things that you're already planning on?
Those would probably be, I mean, we'll do some initial analysis in terms of what information you already have, but we'll create recommendations about the types of analyses going forward, I think.
Should we be looking, to add on your good point, downstream, beyond our borders? Because what we discharge into doesn't stay within the city borders. It goes out in neighborhoods over here, Fairfax County.
Some of that.
Which are our customers, which are our customers too.
Data availability is always the challenge. So let's see what's available. This is very exciting.
Point to Mr. Hill's point, yeah, I don't think the data exists in a collected place, but getting an idea of where, basically what apartment complexes have their tenants pay the bills direct, kind of as utility add-on. That would be a very good piece of information to have, because those are going to be, many of those are going to be your lower income residents in the community, and those utility bills are those passed through by the landlord to them to pay in addition to their rent. And if we had an idea of where they were, how many, that would be really valuable to have. And I think it would take doing a survey of the apartment managers major complexes to get that, but I think that would be useful to have.
And one of the words that, I think, Rosie, you mentioned it, repeatable process. Bianca used that, repeatable process. You know, the processes we use for setting rates is kind of uninspired and archaic. I mean that in the best possible use of those words. You know, you have a public meeting, you advertise in the local paper. It's on a Saturday morning. Nobody shows up. I know our rates affect people, and I know people worry about it, and they have to pay their bills. They just are not the kind of folks that will come to a 9 o'clock meeting or 7 o'clock in the evening meeting or be on a committee that meets every other month because they're too busy with their life, right? I wonder if we could create some kind of process that creates a much more complete picture of our ratepayer that is repeatable and has some scientific heft to it. Because I worry that this do a public notice, have a public meeting kind of solution was probably the right answer, I don't know, 30 years ago. In this day and age, with all the things going on, is that really the right model? Is there another way to get inputs that will reach out and include folks that don't ordinarily know how to interact when their rates are being set? And there's got to be a creative way to do this.
We've thrown around the idea, and this isn't necessarily in response to your question, but you know, we thought about in discussing the slides for this evening, we thought about, you know, our various stakeholder groups, who we've touched as part of the AlexRenew program. When you actually step back and look and see where our SAG is representative of and where our outreach has gone for AlexRenew, it's in a pretty small portion of the city.
Yep.
And we don't have representation from the West End. We don't have representation from Arlandria. And, you know, it begs the question is, as we start going through some of these other infrastructure upgrades at the plant, do we have a different stakeholder group that's more representative of the city to support some of these initiatives, like our EJ, or it's a similar to, you know, to the board, but a stakeholder group. So we've tossed around those ideas, and it, you know, something that might come out of the study is having that better representation of the city. We can talk to our SAG all day long. It's not going to get us any information from anywhere else outside of Old Town, pretty much.
So I think there's a group, probably the largest group, ratepayers, really don't have the time or the interest in a lot of the mechanics of what we do, but they care a lot about the rate. And if we could somehow create a mechanism that allows them to interact on that one issue at that one point in time, and that's create a repeatable process. Love that word. You know, every year we could get a little bit of feedback on how does our rate affect somebody we ordinarily don't hear from. We might not touch them directly either, but
Have you ever discussed compensating the community members for their feedback and participation?
I didn't quite get.
Have you ever talked about compensating community members for their expertise?
Pay them so much per meeting, providing childcare.
Like a stipend. In my day job, when we do engagement with like community-based organizations and members of the community, we usually offer a stipend for people to participate in meetings.
The Alexandria Community Trust did that in their strategic plan as a way to ensure that the participants in the focus groups in the strategic plan were far more representative than instead.
It can make a difference, you know, for someone to be able to participate. You know, is dinner provided? You know, is childcare provided? You know,
Great ideas. Yeah. Again, not for everything, but just rate discussion. Because I look at how much energy we put into rate discussions and how informative they are. And it's just for this group here.
Mr. Hill takes it very personally when no one comes.
I do. I
To the
do.
hearing.
The only time we had a big turnout was when we changed the name of the organization and thought it was a corporate takeover. And, yeah. Good, very good.
Can somebody at our public hearing, can we set it up so somebody, if they just want to kind of talk to us on Zoom, it's possible, they don't have to come down.
That's allowed right now.
Yeah.
All of our meetings are set up that way.
Thanks so much.
Very important topic. Okay, rounding the corner, we're on outcomes. Mr. Carl.
For the monthly report, I think there's just a few items we want to highlight on page 5. If there's anything the board wants to discuss, we can discuss it, but wanted to highlight that we are set up for Spring to Action. Early giving for Spring to Action starts on April 10th, and there's a link in the monthly report to get to our Spring to Action page for LEAP. So that's going to be donations that go directly to Dollar Energy, but it does have our logo on the website, and we do have a nice narrative around LEAP on Spring to Action. So they've been great to work with. I mentioned the 5th floor piece already. We did have a kickoff meeting with the city to discuss use of the 5th floor space. The details of that are the 5th floor would be, we're going through a renovation right now of the 5th floor. We're planning it. We're proceeding with the design. The city would get 36 spaces, a mix of cubes and offices on the 5th floor. And then we would move our IT department up to the 5th floor to be co-located with the city on the 5th floor. And there would be a cost share associated with the construction cost of about equivalent to the floor area that's being used 60-40 between the city and AlexRenew.
Gonna be up here?
I will be up here.
That is fantastic. That is,
What's divisions or sections are planning to come from the city over here?
My understanding is Mr. Scrayback's group and Ms. Castellano would be over here as well
And I think our comms team is
for tests.
for tests. So all test staff. Not all test staff, but staff from tests. So it's Office of Environmental Quality, Sanitary Infrastructure Division, Stormwater Management, the director, and our communications team for the department.
Medina too.
No, these with project implementation.
EPI, okay.
I don't know where they're going.
But you and Jesse and the whole group. That is fantastic.
Is this a plan for something that's longer term? On how long is the lease going to be?
The lease, the initial intent is keep saying lease. So lease of 10 years, and it can be renewed for additional 10
So
years.
it's not just swing space for city hall renovation.
No, it started as the discussion of swing space for City Hall, and, we don't necessarily need the full space. It's going to free up space for us on the 4th floor, where our ops, maintenance, and engineering teams can all be together, and IT will be on its own floor, the 5th floor of the city. We are going to give the city access to the 6th floor as well as the 3rd floor to enjoy some of the other spaces that we have for staff, including the cafe, the wellness rooms, and office space on the 6th floor as well. And the lobby. And we're working out signage too. So we'd likely put a city sign up on the building with the options.
That's tremendous, tremendous.
So the planning meeting started this week. Planning out the spaces and what's needed for, office design, things like that. So it's pretty exciting.
Mr. Carl, you want to say a word about the tunnel completion event?
Just a quick on public engagement, really quick.
Okay.
Our call volumes are getting back to normal. We did want to mention that. Mr. Hill talked about that at Federation meeting. Also, we've lost sight of this because we got so busy with our procurement bill, but the governor did sign SB 372, extending AlexRenew by 1 year to July 1st, 2026. It was a big deal, a few months ago, but procurement legislation kind of took over for us during the General Assembly. Tunnel's done. Hazel completed on March 13th at 10:10 a.m. She finished her 11,377-foot drive. There is a pick scheduled for Thursday. If the board wishes, we can set up a site area on site. You can watch the TBM get lifted out of the shaft. It's pretty exciting. The noises are interesting that you hear when you lift a 90-ton machine. So something you've never seen before. I'd recommend it. We can hook you all up with PPE so you can be on site.
You know what time that'll be? Roughly morning, afternoon?
You will have a better idea of that tomorrow, and I will send out an email. We can get you fit up with PPE here. I know some of the city have expressed interest to come out 1 to 2. Mr. Skrabak had expressed interest, so he's going to, offer it to his team as well. It's going to keep you away from the shaft and all the big machine out. So you asked a question about the event. In addition to Hazel finishing, we sent a draft proclamation over to the city manager's office and mayor's office this morning. April 13th, 2024 will be Hazel the TBM Day. So
Really escalating.
Mark your calendars.
the mayor it's proposed that the mayor will read a proclamation on April 2nd at the legislative meeting. We would like to have some of the skilled trades and staff there present to accept the proclamation and, hooray and get ready for the 13th. 13th, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. There's a lot.
Bring the kids.
Yes, we are trying to be kid friendly, but we're also trying to be and pets cognizant about that we are a public entity. So we will have like temporary tattoos for kids and stuff like that. There'll be a hands-on station where you can pick up pieces of the cutter head. We'll have Meet the Miners is another piece. We'll have PPE there for kids. We've hard hats for the better part of 6 years now that we need to get rid of. So it'll be good, some good swag for kids there as well. We'll have the model displayed there. We'll have the multi-service vehicle sitting on Orinoco Street. So apparently kids like to sit on vehicles. So we'll have construction vehicles around for them to play and fall into. So it should be a great day for families and come out and celebrate. If it rains, we're going to do it the next day. If it rains, we'll do it the next week.
Yeah. Hope it doesn't rain.
And Jameson's open. You all haven't noticed. Been
I've noticed.
equally significant milestone to the tunnel being done. It was getting, that last month that we, went over schedule a month, people were, getting concerned about the night work, but they were very supportive and we made it through and we're back to normal hours.
Saw them working weekends on that too. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a question. You mentioned customer service calls. I heard from someone today that they have been having a hard time submitting online payment through the new portal and haven't been able to submit anything for a week. I was just wondering if that was something you've heard from a lot of people or no?
You can, if you want to forward her my way too, I
Okay.
can certainly help.
Yeah, we're down to like the